Hello and welcome to The Public Good. This is Deja James with Partnership for the Public Good, or PPG, uniting over 380 organizations to make a better Buffalo Niagara region. We have had a plethora of topics lately on federal, national issues, and now we're going to bring it in a little bit more locally again. As you all know, we have a community agenda process where our 380 plus partners are able to enter a pitch competition, you could say, for policy proposals. And I have a plank here with us today, which is part of our top 10 that got voted on in December of 2024 for our community agenda of 2025. And they've actually been on for a few years now. So we're really excited to have them on. They've also been on our radio show prior, which you can see on our YouTube page also, and I'll link that in the caption. But we are talking about Buffalo Public Schools suspension reform. And there's a few different reforms that the group is advocating for. So we're going to get into the details of that. But I'm so excited to have representatives from the coalition and the local organizing group around this issue. And I'm just going to have you guys introduce yourselves really quick, and then we can get into the topic of discussion for today. So I don't know where we want to start, but
I can start.
Go ahead.
Cool. Hi, everyone. My name is Quinn Carroll. I use they and she pronouns, and I'm a youth programs manager at the New York Civil Liberties Union. So part of my role is that I work with BPS students and students really across Western New York on advocacy issues that they care about. And for the last few years, one of our biggest issues has been suspension reform in BPS, but we work statewide as well on things like comprehensive sex ed and the Fair College Admissions Act. But I work with them and you all, so I'm happy to be here today.
Thanks, Quinn.
How about me? I'm Judith Gerber. I'm the Chief Attorney of the Attorneys for Children Unit at the Legal Aid Bureau of Buffalo. As an agency, we have a variety of units. We do criminal defense and appellate work and a variety of civil work, and represent thousands and thousands of clients each year. At our unit, we represent children in child welfare and juvenile justice matters. Those are children who are court involved. And we also operate an education law practice, which has become a very meaningful piece of our work. We believe that addressing the educational needs of children who are court involved is absolutely critical to achieving good and strong outcomes for kids. School is the daily work of children, and so it has great impact on their lives. The other piece is that we will also represent children who are at risk or have challenges in the community who require school representation as well. We wish that we had just 10, 20 attorneys who could just devote themselves to the education law work, because it is such a key need in our community. So we will represent children not only in school suspension and school discipline matters, which is really the heart of our discussion today, but also a broad variety of issues, including special education, access to appropriate supports and services, bilingual education, school stability for children who are mobile or may lack stable housing, and the list goes on and on. So I won't take up more time with that. But just to say that it's a tremendous pleasure to be here and to be with this company, with the New York Civil Liberties Union and with Sam from Western New York Law Center. We are very honored. I'm very honored to be a part of this.
Thank you, Judy.
So that's my little introduction to segue to Sam.
Hi, everybody. I'm Attorney Sam White. I'm with the Western New York Law Center. After some time over at Legal Aid as a public defender, we launched the School Discipline Project, which modeled itself really after Legal Aid's education advocacy program, but specifically focuses on that discipline. We take cases from across the community. They don't have to already be court involved. We do tend to do special education for students who are already engaged in discipline, but we've represented hundreds of students in terms of going to long-term suspension hearings, helping families advocate for themselves through the short-term suspension process, helping families as they go through the appeal process when they feel that something's happened that just wasn't fair. And I'll tell you, there are so many families that need this kind of help. With the suspension rate as high as it is, it's a demand that just can't be met between both of our agencies. There really aren't many attorneys that you could even pay to do this work. So we really had to come together and collaborate to find a solution to the systematic problem, rather than trying to figure out, how to clean up the issue downstream. We've got to go to the source.
Absolutely. And I want to get to that, what the root of the problem is and kind of what the current state of suspension is, because I think a lot of people would watch this and say, whoa, why are there two lawyers here talking about school suspensions? Why do kids need lawyers to talk, for the suspension process? And I know for me, and working in this space, when you all pitched, I had no idea that the suspension process was so systematic and legalized. And honestly, it's almost like criminalizing kids while they're in, and I've heard the school to prison pipeline thing, but it's almost as if the way these processes are, it's like just training kids to just feel like this is the system that I have to face, right? And so anyway, I want to get to what is the current problem. I think, and I don't, correct me if I'm wrong, that the statistic is that we're like the second or the first highest suspension. We're the first highest suspending district in New York State.
Yes. Yep.
Even though we're the second largest school district.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, and we're actually not the second largest school district.
Okay.
We only have 30,000. New York City has almost 1 million kids. Spring Valley, Yonkers, they have more students than we do, but their suspension rates are much, much lower.
So per capita, like per child, we're suspending kids more and longer.
Yes, and it has been that way for the last, I think 6 out of the last 7 school years.
Yep.
Yeah. So.
And one of the lovely things when Quinn came in and the New York Civil Liberties Union came in, they really probed more deeply the data. The district has data, but the data isn't necessarily fully reflective of the depth and degree of the problem. So you've really brought to light what the real substance of this is.
So what are you all proposing to address this problem of us being the highest suspending district? What initial reforms are you all asking for that could help us kind of bring that down a little bit?
Yeah, so we're really trying to get the low-hanging fruit, right? We're not asking for some magical solution. We're actually trying to follow the examples of other school districts similarly situated in New York State. We want to implement some of their practices. We also want to follow the New York State Education Department's recommendations that were put forth in 2022. So we want to see the elimination of pre-K through 3rd grade suspensions. This is when kids really need to be in school learning how to read, how to write, how to do math. It's going to impact their first attempt at taking the Dibble test in 3rd grade. It's going to impact their statewide assessments for mathematics as well. We need to keep them in school so that they have that chance to learn. We want to see suspensions capped at 20 days. This is New York State Education Department's recommendation. We didn't come up with it. This is a best practice that Buffalo has chosen, to not act on as of yet. There's discussion, there's evaluation, but now's the time to act. We want to see vague suspensions or vague code of conduct infractions. We want them clarified, and we want to see things like disrespectful behavior not be punishable by a long-term suspension or even a short-term suspension, because that leads to bias infiltrating its way into the system. What's disrespectful to one background or culture may not be disrespectful to another background or culture. And there may be differences when a student from one culture engages in the same language or behavior versus another student from a different culture.
Right.
And when Quinn's going to talk about it, but when we look at the statistics, it's undeniable the impact that bias has when you look at the numbers. Children of color are being suspended, 2.5 times more for the short-term suspensions. I'm not gonna take the win from yourself. Quinn, get into the stats.
Quinn, please, could you give us a couple of the numbers?
I'm happy to. And I think something that Sam mentioned that's really important is that this is a best practice. This has already been implemented in other school districts across the state by like a decade. So we're a decade behind, right? We're not here coming up with this new solution. We're giving solutions that have been used with fidelity, and have been shown to make.
There's proof of concept.
Yes. Proof of concept for sure. It's
been tested.
Yeah, so Syracuse doesn't suspend pre-K through 3. New York City doesn't suspend pre-K through 3. I think maybe I mentioned this before, but New York City only suspends 1% of their student population. Meanwhile, we're suspending anywhere from 10 to 15%. And that looks like 6,000 to 7,000 students per year that are getting suspended. And I have the numbers right here because that's my job, right? So, and this is as of May 23rd. So as of Friday, we have had 5,103 short-term suspensions. And short-term suspensions, for the listeners, is up to 5 days. Anything past 5 days is considered a long-term suspension. Long-term suspensions, we've had 870 for a total of 5,973 suspensions this year.
Just in this school year?
Just in this school year as of May 23rd.
And we're not done yet. We got a month or two left in the school year.
Okay. Yeah, and we are on track to potentially beat out last year's numbers, which is not something we should be very proud of. So last year we suspended just under 7,000 students. And I wanted to mention that almost 500 of them that have been suspended this year so far are pre-K through 3. So I just want that to sit for a second, that these are young children that are getting suspended who aren't having access to education, food, social emotional learning, right? When you're suspended, you're not understanding what you did wrong. You're just understanding that you can't go to school, and maybe you don't know why. And that's not a way to correct behavior for a young child. That's a way to shut a young child out of an environment that they have a right to be in.
It's taking away the right to education, which is like a core tenet of what we should be upholding as a society. Yeah, I mean, so and for someone, I mean, what is a third grader, up to 8 years old, I think? So we're suspending kids between 3 and 4 and 8 years old. I mean,
and I want to mention a lot of it is for physical contact with the school personnel, which I think is, when read, can be a scary statistic for folks to read. But when you think about it, a majority of these students, when we look at it, are students with disabilities. Yeah. And that is the age in which students with a disability, and I know Judy is the expert in this, but that's when, behaviors are being manifested. Mm-hmm. So they might not even know that they have a disability yet. And physical contact with the school personnel, that's an escalation, right? You don't start off like that, but the teachers need resources. They need skills. The students do too, right? Mm-hmm. But when they're kicked out of school, they don't have the opportunity to learn those skills. That was not the behavior, right? How can we redirect what is the positive behavioral outcome?
And I want to emphasize that too, because you all very much advocate for that teachers need more resources. Yes. We need more mental health, counseling, other type of resources within schools. It's a both and. It's not saying let's just do this and the teachers have to figure it out, right? But you're also holding the district to the accountability of saying, okay, we do need to do this, but you also need to be putting these things in place to make sure that, one, it's successful, and two, that teachers are safe and accounted for and, taken into account in their perspective. So I just want to reiterate that, because I think sometimes when, there's groups that advocate for things and there's another group that's like, well, wait, how's this going to work and how's this going to affect me? It's we're not trying to do this in a complete vacuum of not understanding where you all are. And you've all been just so good at bridging that. And so I just want to make sure, at least on this platform, that is emphasized and that we uplift that, because we want to make sure we're looking at, we look at a holistic picture. And I think when we do the community agenda in general, that's the perspective that we take. And I just want to make sure people understand that. So I'm stating it plainly and clearly here for that reason.
I appreciate it.
Yeah.
We're here for the long haul, right? We're community members too. We're parents too. We're advocates, and we might be experts in what we're talking about, but we're here for the students and we're here for the teachers. The teachers have told us they need more resources. You know, let's have that happen.
Can I jump in and just offer that we've sat down and we've talked with the teachers union. We've talked with individual teachers. We've had conversations with administration, principals, board members. We've talked with parent groups. We've been throughout the community. We've been talking with students. Every opportunity we get to engage with students. I don't know about you guys, but I've got to be on at least 3-4 task forces. We all serve in this capacity to get that input and feedback from all of the stakeholders, because it's not us versus them. It's an us together, so that our kids can be the best Buffalo that we have to offer.
Exactly.
Yeah, I think the thing I'd add here too is that it's interesting that we have lawyers here and the New York Civil Liberties Union, which has a law perspective. And the real issue here is that the use of school suspension and discipline more broadly presents a public health issue. Right, so we are looking at it through the legal framework and doing our best to address it through those tools. But the reality is the entire community needs to provide the kinds of resources and support to children and to families and to school staff and school administration to tackle those challenges that children face. And the blunt instrument to address it is school exclusion. And the surgical instrument that will serve our community and our society is actually a collaborative strategy that addresses children, as you said, Deja, in a holistic fashion. One thing I might add to this, too, is that it's easy because we talk about thousands of children, right? And it's an overwhelming kind of concept. And it can be helpful to individualize this, to understand what a school suspension means for one family, for one child who is struggling and suffering in school. And especially when we talk about the K-3 children, as Quinn said, many children are really wrestling with dysregulation or elements of a disability. So school suspensions can be used really kind of as a relief for school folks who don't really know what to do next with the child. So, for example, we represented a little boy who was a child diagnosed with autism. He was already in a small classroom of 8 children, a teacher and an aide. That classroom setting really wasn't appropriate for him. The year before, in his preschool, he had been really much more successful. He belonged in a smaller classroom setting. And so on a regular basis, he would melt down in the classroom. It was difficult for the staff to manage. He might run out of the room and down the hallway, or even, run for the door. And so the solution, of course, was not to exclude that child from school, and to put the mom, who was in a situation where she had to keep taking off from work, lose her income, be at risk for her job, find some way to explain to her little boy why he couldn't be in school every day. And so what we did on that individual level was to work with the school principal, who didn't really want to suspend him but didn't know what to do. But there really were solutions. And ultimately, through appropriate evaluation, through appropriate meetings with the Committee on Special Education, et cetera, found a setting for him that was much more effective. And ultimately, the most wonderful thing for us was when the parent, let us know that he was really happy, loved school, and things change. Now, not every situation looks like that. Every child's story is different, but I think that's the point, that we're talking about thousands of unique individual children who have an entitlement to be schooled. And what we have a responsibility to do as a community is find the solutions, not the suspensions.
Yeah.
Right?
But it really is a real thing. I've had clients who've lost their jobs because of having to take off repeatedly to watch their kids while suspended. I've had families fall apart, under the additional financial strain. I've seen, mom left alone, no income, facing evictions. It can be a really traumatic cycle that really can set a child, a family, our whole community back, because the hope of one single person, one single child, is the hope of our community. And we need to take ownership for that. And we have to demand that, our leadership take note of that and do something now.
And I want to go back to like your story, Judy, because, it kind of boggles my mind that that family needed a lawyer
Right.
to come in to be able to advocate for something as simple as reevaluating this child, figuring out what resources are needed, and then, putting them through whatever processes needed to happen. And I understand, and I've heard, the IEP or the different processes are really backed up, and there's only a certain amount of certified psychiatrists or different things like that, and there's a lot of other issues in the larger spectrum of providing those services, but for the fail-safe to be, let's just suspend them and get them out of here so that we can deal with something else. You know what I mean? It sounds like that's what you're all describing.
Right. And for any given child, this is we talk about our collaboration on a systems level, but it's also a collaboration for any individual child. So people have to get around the table. Right? When a child has a need, then one needs to be able to facilitate parent or caretakers, whoever it is going to be that meaningful person in that child's life. Sometimes you have to identify that person. Sometimes it's grandma who's going to come to school because, mom is, she's at her job. And so we know it takes that village. And then it's about really trying to pull apart what's going on. And of course, sometimes there's really not that much that is going on. So sometimes we have children who are engaged in the kind of behavior that we all engaged in. And there is less tolerance. I always laugh. I will indulge myself and you by telling a story. My dad, who years ago was a high school history teacher, he would be over 100 now if he were alive, so we're talking a while ago. He was a history teacher and then a guidance counselor. He had students when he was a young teacher who took his car. He had a little car that was very lightweight,
Judy.
smaller than a Beetle, right? It was called a Vespa. And they put it on the top of a building. Like, I think of the school. They somehow lifted his car. And, what would happen today, right, to students who did that? Mm-hmm. Well, nothing happened to them, because it was understood, the context in which they had this relationship with my father, and they loved him, and they were teasing him, and sometimes we so hugely over-respond that we miss the point.
Yeah.
And an over-response can be often much more damaging to children. They become alienated, disconnected. They are not engaged. And so we then produce a generation of a certain student who is so disaffected and disconnected from school.
Well, and I think that's a big thing in society today, because I just feel like there's this fear of young people. And I don't know if that's, history repeats itself. I don't know if this has happened already before, but it's something that's really odd for me to watch.
Yeah.
Like, we've completely eliminated any type of third space for anyone younger than 18 years old. Mm-hmm. and don't be a preteen. Like, there's just nowhere for you to go. And we've eliminated any sort of independence outside of, you know, social media and all the things that we think are evil with the world. And so it just leads to us kind of demonizing young people. And like you said, Judy, it alienates them in a way. And I think people are like, well, why are young people so disaffected? Why do they not care? Why don't they have respect or any of these things? And it's like, well, are you modeling respect to them? Right. Are you showing them what it's like to be treated like a human being with autonomous choices, right? And at this point, we're not. And I think before there was a point where we're like, oh, well, let a kid be a kid. They're going to make mistakes. And it's almost like we're not allowing for that anymore, that threshold has gone all the way down to almost zero.
Yeah, I could talk about, oh, sorry.
Please.
I could talk about this forever.
Yeah.
But like, look at it. It's often developmentally appropriate behaviors, right? These students are pushing boundaries, and that's developmentally appropriate. I remember being a student, I would stand on my chair when the teacher turned around because I'd get a laugh and I'd sit back down. I didn't get suspended for that. Mm-hmm. It was funny. But, you know, like, I was just being a kid. I was pushing boundaries. But that turns into disrespectful behavior or insubordination. And when we ask school, like, teachers, students, administrators, what that means, like, how to define it, they can't. It's so subjective and so biased. And I think it really does go back to the pre-K through 3 students, right? That connection starts at that early age. And if you're getting kicked out of school that early, you're not making the connection to your school environment. So, like, you're not connecting with teachers. You're not connecting with your principals. And so you're missing out on that. So no wonder when you get into high school, when, you know, you're going through a long-term suspension process, we've represented families who have said, like, this feels like a criminal proceeding. Like, this is a child. This is my child. And I'm like, you know, I know. But that's how they're being treated. And they look at it and they're like, this isn't a safe environment for me. You know, what is insubordination? I was just bored. Or, like, I didn't mean anything by it. It's very much like intent versus impact.
Or it's like, I just had a bad day and I didn't like the way you talked to me, because it works both ways, right? Because I've definitely had teachers that spoke to me in a way that I'm like, I'm going to tell my mom and she's going to come down here later because I know I can't say anything because I'm the child, right? Yeah. But, you know, there's moments like that where I've been like, I'm 16 years old. You're talking to me like, you know, or whatever. And so, and like, they're human beings. Like, they're going to have bad days. They're going to have kids pre-K through 3rd are going to have a temper tantrum. They're going to have these things. And I just remember, like you said, when we were younger, it just seems like, you know, I had a kid, and I'm not going to say his name actually because that's probably not good. But he threw a chair at our teacher. Like, he got really, really overwhelmed. Yeah. And he was that type of kid that, like, he would get really frustrated very quickly if he didn't understand. Yeah. And I loved our teachers then, because she understood in that moment that he didn't want to hurt her, that he was frustrated. Yeah. She ducked, which, you know, and she took him into the next room, and they spent the entire lunch period together. And I remember when they got out, I remember I was coming back from lunch and she was just hugging him and he was just crying. Yeah. And whatever, I don't know what they talked about. I don't know what was going on in his life, but they had that moment. And the rest of the school year, I never remember him acting like that ever again. And it just was that moment. Mm-hmm. And who knows what that meant to him. You know what I mean? But it's almost like we can't even get to that point because it's like, oh no, danger, get them out of here.
And that conversation had much more of a long-term impact on his life, I am sure, than getting suspended.
Yeah, absolutely.
And what you described is actually restorative practices, allowing the person who did harm to sit down with the person who was affected by it, the student and the teacher, and giving them the opportunity and the space to, you know, apologize and restore the relationship. Mm-hmm. That hug that you described, the emotion, it reset their relationship more than likely.
Yeah, and I mean, and into adulthood, I mean, it's like, because we're also learning conflict. I mean, it's formative. It's our formative years. Absolutely. That's where we're learning conflict resolution. That's where we're learning how we're supposed to express ourselves, all of those different things. And so if we're just cut off from any resources or human interaction, and then it's like, go home and maybe log on to a Zoom or get on an iPad, what are we doing? If that, because you've all talked about, and we I'm going to have to end the episode soon, so we can't get too much into it. But then sometimes kids aren't even getting access to their education, even though they're supposed to be getting some type of supplemental learning while they're in suspension. And so it's really just this complete cutoff of anything, which isn't conducive. But I want to end the episode on, if a parent or a student going through something like this has this going on right now, how can they be connecting with you all? How can they be learning how to deal with the process, and what resources are available to them?
Would we be able to give you the graphic for our hotline?
We can absolutely include that in the captions, and I can link things like that. But can you talk a little bit about the hotline?
Yeah, so we have a suspension hotline. It's a collaboration of, 6, 7 different agencies. We offer restorative supports. We offer appeal support, representation for long-term suspensions. We do our best to respond as quickly as possible, and, usually you get a call back maybe 24 or 48 hours into the process, and we go with you to the hearing.
Very simple and accessible.
And the number is 716-220-7081.
Perfect. So if anyone has that, make sure you call that number. Go ahead, Quinn. I'm going to let you finish up.
Yeah, I just want to mention the racial disparities piece really quickly.
Please.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So Sam was correct. Typically, BPS suspends about Black students in BPS are 2.5 times more likely to be suspended compared to their peers. That went down just slightly this year, and we're not done with the year yet, so who knows how it'll end up. But right now it's 2.4 times as likely, so really not a big difference. But I wanted to emphasize that Black students only make up 41% of the student population, but they make up 61% of the short-term suspensions. And to put that into a little bit more perspective, white students make up 10% of short-term suspensions and 16% of district enrollment. So Black students make up 41% of all students, but account for more than half of the suspensions that we see. So we know that there is a problem. And when you add disabilities, when you add economically disadvantaged students to that, it goes up and up.
And as you all said, it's about, the community care, but also kind of what health disparities are happening at home, what other things are happening at home. And we already know that Black and brown students are going to already have a disadvantage when they're coming into the educational setting. And so why are we setting up a system that essentially, demerits them automatically just because of the disadvantages they already have coming into the setting? And so we need to be taking that into account as well. And I think everything you all are advocating for is at least helping us take some steps to trying to find some solutions to that initially. And like you all said, you're not asking for anything that hasn't been, tested somewhere else or isn't already implemented. So we're hoping that we can get at least some of these things done this year. And I just appreciate you all so much for coming on the show today. We're going to keep fighting the good fight.
Come to board meetings, everyone. They're available. They're open to the public. They're the third Wednesday, I think, of every month. BPS has it on their website, but I'm looking at the camera now. So please join us. That would be great.
Yeah. So if I may, I'd love to end on a message of hope.
Please do.
Right? I think that we know that this work is achievable. The ends are achievable, and it is so worth the investment and the effort for each and every child in our community. And we encourage parents to speak up, to become engaged, to not accept the status quo, but also not to demonize, right? Those school folks who are themselves fighting the good fight, to try to find the mechanisms themselves within their schools to make a difference for children. So I think all of us could not be more grateful to the Partnership for the Public Good for their support of our endeavor, for Sam for pushing this along, to
But on that note, thank you so much for the note of hope, Judy. This has been The Public Good from Partnership for the Public Good, or PPG, uniting over 380 organizations to make a better Buffalo Niagara region and society and world. As I keep saying, thank you so much. We're here with you every Tuesday. Please make sure to like and subscribe to our YouTube page, and we will see you again next week. Thank you.